we've had the Chelsea Manning leaks, then came Edward Snowden, and today another huge WikiLeaks data dump. They're calling it Vault 7, and they say it's from a division at the heart of the CIA. Thousands of documents, millions of lines of code, and if it is all genuine, it shows the extraordinary array of hacking and spying tools available to the CIA. Some of that won't be a surprise, some of it's colourful, the ability to infect Samsung TVs, internet-connected ones, and turn them into microphones that record conversations. The British apparently helped with that one, by the way. Well, the CIA won't confirm the authenticity of any of this, but there are two notable questions. Is it reasonable for the CIA to have these abilities? WikiLeaks suggests it's overreach. But the second is, why can't the CIA guard any of its own secrets? And if it's incapable of doing so, should it harbour software that could allow massive abuse by those with malign intent? Well, here's David Grossman.
The documents are purportedly from the CIA's Centre for Cyber Intelligence. 7,818 documents with 943 attachments. WikiLeaks say it's only part of what it intends to publish.
The rise of connected devices has promised intelligence agencies like the CIA a new golden age of spycraft, where every home is filled with all sorts of objects that can be enlisted to gather data against their owners. What WikiLeaks have supposedly got hold of is extensive details of exactly how the CIA are going about doing this, and the very computer code that they're using.
This seems to be an incredibly damaging leak in terms of the tactics, techniques, procedures, and tools that were used by the Central Intelligence Agency to conduct legitimate foreign intelligence. In other words, it's made my country and my country's friends less safe.
For example, the WikiLeaks documents suggest that the CIA have managed to bypass the encryption on Android mobile phone messaging apps like Telegram, Signal and WhatsApp and collect audio and messaging traffic before it's encrypted. These are apps which many people use to relay sensitive information because they believe that they are impenetrable. One technique, codenamed Weeping Angel, can turn a Samsung smart TV in a target's living room into an always-on microphone, sending conversations directly to the CIA. According to WikiLeaks, this was developed with the help of the UK's GCHQ.
WikiLeaks say they've got hold of millions and millions of lines of computer code, the CIA's toolbox of tricks and hacks. But they say they won't be releasing what they call these armed cyber weapons until a consensus emerges on how they can be dealt with, how they can be analysed and disarmed.
If the data in these documents is verified, it will add to the damage done to Western intelligence agencies by Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden. We don't yet know how this information got out, but one former CIA director believes one of the biggest dangers to secrecy is cultural.
In order to do this kind of stuff, we have to recruit from a certain demographic. And I don't mean to judge them at all, but this group of millennials and related groups simply have different understandings of the words loyalty, and secrecy, and transparency than certainly my generation did. And so we bring these folks into the agency, good Americans all, I can only assume, but again, culturally, they have different instincts than the people who made the decision to hire them.
What's supposedly been leaked suggests no limit to the CIA's ambition, like hacking self-driving cars as a future weapon for assassinations. What is likely to be most damaging, though, is that the US intelligence agencies as yet can't be sure of just how many of their secrets have been breached.
David Grossman. Well, our diplomatic editor, Mark Urban, is with me. This leaking is a kind of a big issue, Mark. And how and why and how many people have access to all this stuff?
Well, the agencies are caught in this terrible place where they've had to create huge surveillance programs, let's face it, that's what we're talking about, empower an awful lot of people to share that information because of the lessons of 9/11 and other systemic failures, stovepiping, they want to get across all that. 800,000 plus people are cleared to top secret and higher level code word level in the US, and of course if even a tiny proportion of those are ideologically opposed, greedy, they want to sell the stuff, or working for another power, enormous damage can be done.
And it's getting much harder for them, or harder for intelligence agencies generally, to attribute or track where different malware and tools are coming from?
I mean, my takeaway from my initial read of this, the most interesting stuff was this Umbridge group they talked about, which was a group in the CIA that harvests other states' cyber attack tools and some of these hacker groups one's heard about to use by the CIA in deniable attacks. Now, add to that we now know that many of these cyber attack tools with, if you like, an American forensic signature are in the hands of WikiLeaks and who knows who else, and the wilderness of mirrors about attributing cyber attacks. Who the hell has done this? We saw that with the Democrats in this last summer. Becomes harder and harder to work out.
Thanks, Mark. Well, Bruce Schneier is a security technologist and Harvard fellow. I spoke to him earlier and I asked him if this was a disaster for the CIA.
I mean, certainly whenever classified documents are released by an intelligence agency, it is a disaster. These are particularly sensitive. They're hacking tools. They're techniques the CIA uses. And if I was inside the CIA, I would call this a disaster as well.
What do you think is going on here? That we have this leak, it seems to be one thing after another at the moment. What's happened to the culture of secrecy that you would expect in an intelligence agency?
It's not the culture of secrecy, it's the culture of computing. These documents are on computers, they're on networks, which means they're vulnerable. They're vulnerable for outsiders hacking, they're vulnerable for insiders taking them and leaving. And we see this against the CIA, the NSA, a Panamanian law firm, the Democratic National Committee, climate change researchers, again and again and again, individuals, organizations, nation states are hacking these documents and in many cases making them public.
Michael Hayden, former director of the CIA, told the BBC earlier that he thought there may be something about a kind of a culture of the people who you need to recruit to be kind of working the computers and devising all these tools in the first place, that perhaps they just have a different view of their life and their career than, say, the old spooks did, you know, a generation ago.
You know, maybe that's generalizing from one example from Edward Snowden, maybe from two from Chelsea Manning. This is probably an outsider, not an insider, like the NSA Equation Group documents were, hacked by the shadow brokers. You know, it's really hard to generalize. There are so few examples. Anything we know is that these documents are more vulnerable because they're on networks, which means individuals can do more damage.
Yeah. Now, look, how dangerous is it that a lot of these CIA tools are now out, you know, in the hands of other people? How much damage can those other people do if those tools leak through?
Well, the tools are leaked, and near as we can tell, they've leaked for a while. WikiLeaks said that they've been passed around for a while. So they're already done damage. Now we can start getting security, that now that we know what the attacks are, we can fix these systems and be less vulnerable. And that's really the way to think. I mean, yes, it's bad that these attacks are out there, but they were out there anyway. If the CIA knew them, it was likely other countries did as well. So getting them in the hands of the public so they can be fixed is really a measure of making things better.
Bruce Schneier, nice talking to you. Thank you very much. And Bruce also told me he always puts something over the cameras on his various devices to make sure they're not filming him, but not because of the Russians or the Chinese, but because teenagers, hackers, can sometimes have fun by filming things. Glenn Greenwald is the journalist that campaigns on these national security issues. He joins us from Rio de Janeiro, where he lives. Very good evening to you. Have you seen anything in these leaks that make you think the CIA was doing anything wrong?
One, I think, very significant revelation is that the CIA actively encourages and at times even pays various companies and organizations to preserve vulnerabilities that they're able to exploit in a lot of these software programs, which means that not only they can go through these backdoors that they make sure exist, but so can hacker groups or terrorist organizations or other nation states. And it shows the CIA, like the NSA, is making the internet more unsafe for everybody, and I think that's very disturbing. And
that's been an issue, and it has been discussed, is that maybe they should tell the Googles and the Apples where the vulnerabilities are rather than exploit them. Have you seen any evidence that listening in on televisions or making driverless cars crash, have you seen any evidence that these have been applied to good people or ordinary people as opposed to what President Trump would call the bad hombres? Do you think they've been misusing these tools?
One of the problems with having a massive surveillance state and intelligence community that operates almost entirely in the dark is we know very little about what they actually do. There's very little accountability. There's very little oversight, which is why, for example, when we did the Snowden reporting, even people on the intelligence committees of the British Parliament, of the American Congress, said we didn't even know that these things were taking place. So based on the first sort of tranche of documents that WikiLeaks has released, we know the CIA has extraordinary abilities that they're exploiting. We don't know yet quite against whom they're using it, but the history of the CIA is one filled with abuse, and we ought to know a lot more about how they're using it.
But let's be honest. Have you really seen anything in this lot that surprises you in terms of a skill or a talent or a tool that they have? And in a lot of ways, this is just what you would expect a really top-class spying agency to be doing, isn't it?
I think some of the methods that they use and the extent of control they're able to obtain over people's Android phones, the progress that they've made into people's iPhones has actually surprised people who work in the security field. It's not shocking that the CIA is trying to do it, although I don't think a lot of people knew that the CIA has such a vast surveillance apparatus. They assumed that the NSA was really the agency that uses billions of dollars to do that. I think that's surprising. So it's not that it's shocking that the CIA is trying, but I think it has been surprising the extent to which they're able to really invade a lot of these devices and take full control over them through encryption and through other devices, the programs that are intended to keep them out.
I suppose that really the fundamental argument is do we want intelligence agencies who can do clever stuff to spy on people from abroad, preferably, who are doing or mean us harm? Or do we not want intelligence agencies to do that? And I mean, we always come back to this. I've spoken to you about it before. In the end, if you're going to have intelligence agencies, you have to let them get on with the job, and you can't expect them to stand there telling you what they're doing, because it isn't going to work if they do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, there's an absolutist way to look at things, which is very simplified, which is either they get full secrecy or they have none. And then there's a more sophisticated way to look at it, which I think we as journalists ought to be adopting, which is, yes, you need some degree of secrecy, but in a democracy, secrecy is extremely corrosive and extremely dangerous. And for agencies that we've allowed to operate almost entirely in the dark, as journalists, our objective ought to be to report on what they're doing, and we ought to cheer for when there's transparency, because that's our role. Let the government worry about and fret about and try and protect secrecy. As journalists, we ought to be devoted to telling the public what these governments are doing in the dark, and that's why I'm really grateful whenever there's revelations like these.
Some people say WikiLeaks timing, or WikiLeaks have been sort of strangely related to Trump in these kind of ways. Do you think there's anything funny about the timing of this? That is, it's another difficult week for Trump with questions to answer, and this whole furore over President Obama and what did he tap Trump? Is this distraction?
I mean, it's funny because we like to always look at Russian media and the Arab world and mock them for conspiracies, and yet we in the West sure do love our conspiracies. Oh, there was some weird timing issues with WikiLeaks. It was intended to distract. There's always important news going on. WikiLeaks published this material not in a particularly sensitive week. It takes a long time to process this material. As someone who's worked with large archives, I can assure you that that's the case. And unless we have evidence that WikiLeaks manipulated the timing or was working in conjunction with the Trump administration, I don't think we ought to be assuming as rational actors until we have evidence for it that actually took place. And I don't know of any evidence that says that anything like that happened.
Glenn Greenwald, thanks very much. We've had the Chelsea Manning leaks, then came Edward Snowden, and today another huge WikiLeaks data dump. They're calling it Vault 7, and they say it's from a division at the heart of the CIA. Thousands of documents, millions of lines of code, and if it is all genuine, it shows the extraordinary array of hacking and spying tools available to the CIA. Some of that won't be a surprise, some of it's colourful, the ability to infect Samsung TVs, internet-connected ones, and turn them into microphones that record conversations. The British apparently helped with that one, by the way. Well, the CIA won't confirm the authenticity of any of this, but there are two notable questions. Is it reasonable for the CIA to have these abilities? WikiLeaks suggests it's overreach. But the second is, why can't the CIA guard any of its own secrets? And if it's incapable of doing so, should it harbour software that could allow massive abuse by those with malign intent? Well, here's David Grossman.
The documents are purportedly from the CIA Center for Cyber Intelligence. 7,818 documents with 943 attachments. WikiLeaks say it's only part of what it intends to publish.
The rise of connected devices has promised intelligence agencies like the CIA a new golden age of spycraft, where every home is filled with all sorts of objects that can be enlisted to gather data against their owners.